So hello folks, and welcome back to the Bug Bash. We are excited to have you all join us for another episode of this live series where we tackle real world challenges of test automation with folks who face them every day. I'm your host, Jenna Beckett, and it is great to be chatting with you all again today. Whether you are joining us live or you're catching the replay, today you are in the right place if you are wanting to get started with testing Salesforce applications. And we'll be focusing in on the Cypress end-to-end testing piece of testing Salesforce applications. Now, before we dive into content, I do want to take a moment to congratulate this week's Bug Bash swag winner, and that is screen name Pyromanga. We will be sending them just a little swag package, and you could get one too by attending the live stream of these sessions. We do them every 2 weeks, or offering up a future topic suggestion for one of these sessions in our community discussion thread here in the Discord server. Now, I'm going to take a quick look around of what is going on in the Cypress ecosystem, and I'm starting off with Cypress accessibility. So we actually just added a custom accessibility rule to Cypress, and this one goes beyond what you can glean from your application using static scans. It actually flags accessibility issues that only appear through users interacting with your app. If you have not yet tried Cypress accessibility, now's the perfect time. We just launched a free 1-week trial of that. No questions asked. You just fill out a form, and I have that linked in our resources in the chat or in the description if you're looking at the replay. So now's a great time to go pick that up, run it against your test, and see what kind of accessibility situation that you have going on. The next thing in talking about Cypress and the Cypress ecosystem is that we recently completed a preview of the newest version of the Cypress framework, Cy15, with our ambassador and Cypernaut communities. During that preview, we received some great feedback and are happy to say that Cy15 will be available for everyone this week. So look out for an announcement on our socials so you can try out the new Cypress Studio experience, including in-app, so in the Cypress runner, test editing, and point and click assertions. So going to be a good one to try out. We're excited to get it in your hands. And speaking of excited to get in your hands, our team is heads down working on delivering our much anticipated natural language testing command, CyPrompt. In fact, our co-founder, Jennifer Sheehan, recently released a blog answering many of the common community questions that we've received up until this point. It's really worth a read if you want to be ready when CyPrompt ships. So check out that link in the resources or description, and let us know if there's any questions that are still unanswered for you. Now going on to some of the great work that's going on in our Cypress community. So again, for those attending live, check out that resources drop that I made at the beginning of this live stream. I'll do it again at the end as well. I have a couple of articles that I think would be really great resources for anyone. And the first up is over on Cypress's Dev2 platform. And it's called Reusing Dynamic Values in Cypress. Store once, reuse anywhere. This one actually walks you through simple patterns for persisting values across your test without, having to resorting to hacks or anything like that. So if you've ever struggled passing IDs or tokens between steps, you'll want to check out this article, and big shout out to Sahani Katharangai for this resource. It is a great article. Another article that I think would be great for anyone looking to scale their test automation practices in a large-scale enterprise is a new article coming from Cypress ambassador Fritz Vandersloot. Again, this is all about how that testing culture goes from a smaller organization to one that has grown rapidly, and how you keep your testing practices current and really embedded, creating a positive test culture. So that article, again, link for you in resources. Go check them both out. Let us know what you think. Now it is time for us to switch gears to today's focus. So to do that, I'm going to take just a second and get the right screen shared. So give me just 1 second. So, that is switching us gears into today's focus. And as you can see from what's on my screen, it's all about Salesforce. So Salesforce apps are everywhere, but testing them can be just a little tricky. Between login flows, dynamic DOM structures, Lightning web components, and iframes, it's easy to see why you can get tangled up in the process. Today's session is going to be all about showing how Cypress can handle these challenges and help you get a reliable test suite running in your Salesforce environment. We are going to be keeping this session beginner friendly, so if you've never tested Salesforce before, this session will really help you get started. And then look out for future bug bash sessions where we're going to take deeper dives into specific Salesforce use cases. So starting off, we're going to be talking about just getting Salesforce set up and doing an authentication workflow. Here you can see a screen where I log into a sandbox environment that I'll be using for this demo. And when you start testing Salesforce, the first thing that you need to know is that these sandbox environments are going to be your best friend. They are the safest place to create and delete data. Of course, if your organization has, seeded data or specific records that are used for testing purposes, or just a really good test plan around testing in your live environment, Cypress can handle that too, but for most purposes, you're going to want to do this in a sandbox environment, whether it be like a dev edition or some type of pre-production phase. When you are going into log in and do an authentication flow, obviously you are going to need sensitive details like usernames, passwords, security tokens. And those are not things that you actually want to put into your spec files. So I'm going to go ahead and before we log in and look at the Salesforce application, we're going to get ourselves set up in my code editor here using Visual Studio Code. So when we are trying to keep that sensitive detail out of the specs, the clean way to do this is by passing them to test as environmental variables. That way you can swap out, like multiple Salesforce instances, even different test accounts, and you can do that easily without having to go in and change a lot of code. So quick demo on this. We're starting in VS Code. This is just our demo project. All it is a React shell with Cypress installed. So you're going to see a familiar Cypress structure here. Obviously, if you are testing a live environment, you might have this embedded in the repo where you have your custom components for Salesforce, or you might also, keep it completely separate in its own repository. Cypress best practices is keeping the test code as close as possible to the code that you are going to test. But, given Salesforce's unique instance situation, we often see these type of test suites stored in a completely different repository. So I have my Cypress project yet. We're focusing in here on setting up our environmental variables. So 2 files that I want to bring to your attention. We have the env file and just making sure we have the stream running. Somebody if you can drop me in chat, just let me know that you can see my code editor in the stream. C typing. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So in Visual Studio Code, we are going to go ahead and look at 2 files, our .env and .env sample. Obviously, I can't show you the env file, but I'm going to show you a sample of, with some pseudocode that gives you an idea of what kind of data we're going to be storing here. So the first thing we're going to have is our base URL and our login URL. These are going to be different depending on what kind of environment you're using in Salesforce, whether it be a dev environment or some type of sandbox. So make sure you have the correct login URL for your specific environment. This base URL, really just your org's instance. Of course, a username, password, and this is especially important if you are going to be utilizing a application where you do not have your IP addresses whitelisted in like the Salesforce safe IP addresses. You will need a security token for login purposes. Very easy to generate. You can go to your profile, and do a quick search on security token, and it's very easy to regenerate. It just shoots you off an email. And then also you're going to have your home URL. So a return URL in Salesforce, really just once you go through those login flows, because you're kind of being passed back and forth between different domains. This just says, hey, once everything is authenticated, the cookies are set, where am I going to? So from this env, we're going to actually jump over into our Cypress config file. And you can see here that what we're doing is we are taking all of these values and we are constructing a config const object here in our Cypress config. And we do that so that these values, and you can see kind of here with my or statements, that I want to be able to pull these values either from my env file or from files that are being passed in through a node process, like a command line prompt. So utilizing those, getting them into my env object gives me the most flexibility on how I can pass those in and override them. Again, I do want to point out that one little gotcha that I mentioned. I'll go in a little more deep here. Salesforce often blocks logins on IP addresses that are not trusted. So before you ever run your first test, make sure that the machine or CI environment that you're testing from has whitelisted in Salesforce your IP ranges. Otherwise, you could hit like really hard to debug failures. If it is not possible for you to do that whitelisting, again, that security token is a backup that I'll be using in my own workflow here. Now we're going to go back over to the Salesforce sandbox now. So let me grab that. And I'll go ahead and, get logged in. So let me do that. And as I'm logging in, I want you to take a look at this. It does look like a very simple process to start off with. But behind the scenes, what you're doing is bouncing between a number of different hosts, a number of different domains, and they're passing cookies around to set up your session. And that is why UI login tests have a tendency to flake in Salesforce. So while UI login is definitely a flow that should be tested, so that means going in and manually getting the login input, typing in the password, going through the UI to get yourself authenticated into the application. That should be a part of at least your happy path or your smoke test. But for the majority, because that introduces a lot of opportunity for test flake, the majority of the time you should leverage an API-based login. And that is what I'm going to walk you through here. So we're going to go through that login screen that I just demoed. And then our home is going to be this marketing CRM classic setup here. This is really just a shell, like a kind of play around, do some testing practice project for me. So all of this is just dummy data that we're going to be playing with. Now, for us to get started with doing our authentication flow, we're going to first need to have a specific package installed in our project. So I'm going to jump back over to our Visual Studio Code, and the package that we need to have installed is called JS Force. Again, linked over in the resources. And this package is just a Node.js library for working with Salesforce. It actually wraps Salesforce APIs so that you can log in. You can run queries. You can do CRUD on objects. You can load data in bulk using this. And you can even subscribe to events, to trigger actions from using this package. So to get us set up and do this kind of authentication workflow, I've pre-built everything for ease of this live stream, but we're going to walk through step by step how you can set this up on your own. So I'm going to start off in our authentication spec. So that's going to be in my Cypress directory and just a auth.sci. And when we get here, you're going to see that there is really minimal code. And let's see. Awesome. So if you can take a look here, you'll see this very minimal code that I have going on. Most of this code has actually been abstracted out into helpers and custom commands since all these login actions, all these steps that we're going to be going through, they are going to be repeated globally throughout our test suite. So anything that you're going to be doing at a global level, it is best to put that into a custom command. So all we're doing here is we are calling our custom command. And then we are, once all the work in the custom command has been completed, we are actually over here grabbing an element just to do some type of visual UI check that we are where we should be. So to begin with, what we want to do is let's dive into this sci.login and see, the code that powers this login flow. So again, it's a custom command. It's going to be in your support file in the commands.js. And here is this custom command you will see right in front of you. And the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to grab our base URL. And we're grabbing that either from the env file or from your Cypress config file. And then we are going to call upon a task. And that task is defined here on line 16. So we are calling on a sci task called SF login. And this task and all the steps for this task, I've actually abstracted away into its own file. So let me go ahead and hop over there, scroll up to the top, and let's walk through this. So starting here at line 7, we are going to start by doing a server-side login. And I want you to kind of think of this as like a backstage pass given to us from Salesforce. The result of these 2 lines of code is going to be a session ID and the instance URL for our Salesforce application. Going next down into these 2 lines, we're going to do a little bit of cleanup work on constructing our target URL. And then we are going to construct in line 14 through 16 here, a Visual Force Session Bridge URL. And I'm going to go into detail on what that is. Right now, just know this helps us pass around cookies. Finally, once we have all of our cleanup work done, our session bridge URL constructed, now we are going to start building out the front door URL. And front door is a special Salesforce URL that takes our session ID and sets the browser cookies on the instance host. So basically, this is like how the browser learns that backstage pass we were handed by Salesforce is really valid. Now, earlier, I mentioned that we needed to build a Visual Force Session Bridge. So I want to draw your attention to right here. This is really the secret sauce to our login flow, because instead of jumping straight to Lightning, which is, what you're in when you've logged in and you're looking at that marketing CRM that I showed you, that's Lightning. So when we point front door's return URL to the Visual Force Session Bridge, What that's doing is the page is actually transferring the cookies so that when Lightning boots up, it is already in a trusted state. Without this bridge, what you're going to see is that Lightning starts up. It can't read the right cookies. They're usually called an Aura session ID. This is what it's trying to read. So you might see something like unable to read Aura token from the response. And what this bridge is doing is it's really just fixing that handshake between these different domains to get us authenticated and into our instance. Now we need to head back over because this completes all of our kind of background work for performing our task. Again, tasks are run in that background node environment. So all of this is happening in a node process. So if I jump back over to our commands, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up here on visit line 18. So this is where we're taking that front door URL that we've constructed and we're visiting that URL. And when we visit that URL, it does include that return URL for the session bridge. And we are going to put in a little bit of, kind of like checks along the way, making sure that we are in the right spot. And the first way we're going to do that is right here. I have a get origin helper that really just kind of helps you very quickly figure out where you're at. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to compare that to Lightning. Again, this is that base URL that we extracted. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. Extracted in the first line of this custom command. And we're just making sure that we landed there. So if our process over in Salesforce Task.js didn't land us here, we're doing that absolute visit to make sure we know where we're at. Then we're going to go ahead and do some location checks here at the bottom. I'm going to do that in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to check host name. I'm going to check path name. And then I'm actually going to end off on a UI check. And that's just making sure that I have a stable shell application there so that I can get started with additional UI checks and actions in my application. So this is pretty much the extent of our custom command. So now really what we need to do is we need to power up Cypress and we need to run it. So let me go ahead and open up a terminal and we are just going to run npm, npm run Cypress open. This is a script that I defined in my package.json file. So let's go ahead and let's get that open. All right, you all should be seeing my local runner application now. So we were in this auth spec. I'm going to jump over there, let it execute this test. So we're going to go through logging in. It gets me into the application. We're doing our kind of location asserts along the way. And then we're rounding off all of that with making sure we are where we think we are with doing a couple of UI checks. So very quick walkthrough of a login workflow in Salesforce. Again, this is an API-based login using that JSForce plugin. Again, this is for something that you would do most of the time throughout your test suite, but you're going to at least need one of those smoke tests that have you logging in manually through the UI. So now that we can land reliably in Lightning, let's go ahead and let's talk about selectors in Salesforce. So Lightning uses dynamic IDs. It uses the shadow DOM, framework generated attributes, and all of these can be a little problematic for anyone doing test automation. If you grab, whatever selector DevTools gives you, it will likely break tomorrow, unfortunately. So to avoid these kind of volatile attributes, we lean more on accessible, human, meaningful hooks into our UI elements. So let's go ahead and let's look at some of the selectors that you're going to want to avoid. So if I go and open up the inspector here, we'll probably have to do this twice. All right, so in looking at the inspector, there's a couple things that are going to kind of stand out here. First, you can see this data aura rendered by. That is one that is going to change quite often. The kind of crux of it is, though, not every time. About every second or third time is when it's going to change. So you kind of get a false sense of security if you just write a test, run it once. Make sure you're burning in those new tests when you're doing Salesforce UI testing. Other things that you could see that, you know, aren't immediately shown here on screen is there's also a lot of LWC or Lightning Web Component dash some kind of like dynamically generated combination of letters and numbers. Those are used as classes. You also have auto-generated IDs. Again, usually a combination of letters and numbers. And you can have another approach that people take to kind of getting around the dynamic selectors is using really long nth child chains. All of these can be really brittle. And I'm going to demonstrate this just by doing a quick add into our auth test. So one of the ones we were looking at was one of those data aura rendered selectors. So let's go add that into our test. And let me hop back over here. So we're just going to add it right here. We're going to say sci.get. Oh, fun. All right, let's try that again. Sci.get. And we are going to add in a div with the attribute data aura. Oh, rendered, not selector. Rendered by. And the value for that is going to be 393 0 semicolon p. Okay, so definitely something that is dynamically generated, not very human readable. I mean, we can read it. We just don't really understand a lot about what it means. So let's go ahead, get in my closing single tick there. And what we're going to say is that this should be visible. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. When I do, it should be rerunning my Cypress test here. Oh, don't judge me for the number of screenshots on my desktop, friends. There's a lot of them. All right, so here we go. Looks like we're still loading. So, looks like, this is probably going to fail. So it didn't even work the first time. So let's say this is a test I wrote last week. I'm coming back. I'm running it locally. Suddenly that has changed. So I'm going to go ahead and give this time to fail. But I also want to show you, what might be a better way to go in and kind of get this main content section, which is what this data aura rendered by was actually targeting. So let's go back over to Visual Studio Code. All right, so instead of this selector, we're going to use something, again, more human readable, and more visual, based on visual intent. So we're going to rely on a role attribute, and we're going to say that the role attribute we are looking for is main. Thank you, Copilot. And we're going to use that as a selector instead, again, saying should be visible. So let's go ahead, save that. Here we go, running through the test. And looks like we've passed. So when you are going through and looking for selectors, again, this type of selector, like a role attribute or an ARIA label, these are going to be much more stable selectors. in general, the ones that you are going to want to prioritize, and these are like in order of preference here. So first, your own data test ID hooks, which you can add in when building custom Lightning components. Second preference is going to be attributes like I just leveraged here, things like aria, role, label, title. All of those are good, stable selectors. You might also consider using stable landmarks like, this main content section, things that would not likely change from one iteration to the next. You can also leverage link href patterns by doing some type of regex. And finally, and probably the least preferential because it is most likely of all these to change, is the visible text that you see, and utilizing that as a selector. So if you elect to lean on the accessible roles and names for your selectors, I do recommend that you install the Cypress testing library plugin. It makes querying for these elements super quick because you have commands like find by role. Those just make it really easy to go in and not have to build out your own custom commands so that you don't have these really long selectors in your test files. Now, I will say another caveat when dealing with forms, it can be really handy there to lean on labels. Understanding though that the framework you're using, it must wire the labels to the input, usually do by default, but just keep that in mind. This again is going to help you avoid those auto-generated selectors that are usually really prevalent in Salesforce forms. I do want to show you an example of a helpful custom command that you can leverage if you are going to be using those type of labels for making selections in a form. So let's hop back over to our custom commands file. And if I scroll down, we have a type by label custom command. All it's doing, it's taking in label text. It's taking in the value that you would want to type into the input. So taking those in, looking for a contains a specific label with the label text you pass in, getting that for attribute, and then using that for attribute to then go out and get the input that is associated with it. So this is really great, helpful custom command if you're doing that type of selector strategy in your forms. Next thing that we are going to be talking about is, how we could implement this. Again, very simple custom command. I'll just hop over and show you the code that you would write out if you were going to leverage it. So you would say something like type by label, and then we would pass in, I want the search and I want to search the word test. So very easy, very clean in your test file, something that definitely qualifies for custom command status because it will likely be used globally. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just comment that out though, because we're going to be running this again, I'm sure. The last thing that I will mention about selectors though, before we move on, is that the best thing to keep in mind is that because of the dynamic nature of Salesforce, it is a good practice to favor intentful DOM queries. So going back to that like human meaningful intent way of looking for element targets. So this means really like designing your queries based on the visual intent of the user. And I have just a couple examples that I wanted to show you that I'm going to pop in here into our file. All right, let's do this. All right, so first, let's look at this contains. So again, using human visual intent, I want to go to the nav bar. I'm looking for the thing that I can click on, the anchor tag, and I want it to say the word contacts. Another thing I mentioned using URL patterns. So here, one of those checks that you can put, one of those guardrails, making sure that you are where you think you are before proceeding with doing interactions with the UI, going through, finding the location, path name, and then matching it to a certain regex. So both of these really good for that kind of visual intent, something that a user could see. And while we are talking about managing the Salesforce DOM, it is really important to know, in addition to a good selector strategy, that the Salesforce DOM heavily leverages Shadow DOM. And they do that via the Lightning Web Components. And it's done to encapsulate markup and styles. So a component CSS doesn't leak out and outside CSS doesn't break the component. In the Chrome DevTools, you will be able to actually spot elements like this. They're called lightning inputs, and you can see them because they'll have this designation of like a shadow root with nested controls underneath there. So I want to show you this first. So let me pop back open not our tests, but our UI. Let's see here. There it is. Okay, so before we can get started though, I need to show you in the inspector. This is something that you actually have to go and change a setting for. It is not enabled by default. So if you are in Chrome, you go to settings in the DevTools and you look at elements, show user agent shadow DOM. That is what you're going to want to enable to be able to do this. Now, again, these are very commonly found on forms. So let's go ahead and let's go over to contacts. I'm just going to click a new contact. And here we are going to make sure that we can see the shadow DOM by using this phone input. So I'll just go ahead and I will inspect it. And you can see here is that shadow DOM root that I was talking about that we can see enabled. And we are in a lightning web component, this lightning input. So these are the things that you are looking for when you're out in the DOM trying to figure out, is this thing part of the shadow DOM? Remember though, it is important that you know this, because when you are actually going out and you are trying to test elements that are part of the shadow DOM, regular CSS selectors, they can't cross the shadow boundary. Neither can XPath if you're using XPath. Cypress actually supports being able to cross over into that shadow DOM boundary in two ways. And I'm going to flip over to my Visual Studio Code to show you this. So the first thing is in the Cypress config file, you are going to see include shadow DOM true. And this is something that you can go in, set in your Cypress config file. And then once we have this set, when we need to target an element that is inside of a component, we actually have to transverse that shadow root that I just showed you. So let me show you a quick example of this. I'm just, again, going to plug this over into our auth spec file here. So dragging and dropping in an example. Give me 1 second here. All right, so here's our example. So when you are having to, first of all, when you have that include shadow DOM enabled in your Cypress config, and you are needing to cross that shadow boundary, you're gonna need to use this dot shadow. That is what allows Cypress to cross that boundary. So you're gonna go out, get your element, your lightning input. We were looking at phone number. There was also first name. You could, use any of them. Cross into that shadow boundary, find the actual input that is there in the shadow DOM, and then you can take action on it or pull values out of it. Again, this is an input. I want to show you an example of buttons as well. These are very similar if you're taking that click action. So these are great examples of how you can work with that shadow DOM inside of your Salesforce application. And also just really be cognizant of, when you are dealing with it, because if you, again, try and target it with normal CSS selectors, it's going to fail. It's going to tell you it's not there. You're going to be able to see it on the screen. Sometimes that's really hard to debug. Now we've talked about shadow DOM, which is a challenge in that you have to overcome when working with Salesforce. But another one of the biggest challenges in testing Salesforce applications is interacting with iframes. And usually this happens when you have visual force pages embedded inside of Lightning. So to show you an example of this, I'll flip back over to our test application here. And I'm going to get out of the contact form and I'm going to go over to dashboards. And I've made this super informative. This is a widget dashboard for our testing purposes. So when I'm here though, I do want to go ahead and I'm going to inspect. And if we scroll up, we are going to see that in this instance, especially with dashboards, especially with reports, we are inside of an iframe. One of the biggest things that you need to pay attention to when you are working inside of an iframe is the source that you are working on. So here, if I take a look at the domain for this source, Cypress.io 2 dev edition, that's all the same as the domain I'm already operating in my auth test, the one that's set as our base URL. So this is one variety. The other variety that you can see, especially when it comes to custom dashboards, custom reports, is you might see these as cross-domain iframes. Now, I don't have in this sandbox example a cross-origin iframe to demonstrate from, so I'm going to show you an example in our test project using pseudocode that will give you a good foundation for starting to work with them. So heading back over to Visual Studio Code, we are going to start in our package.json. First thing you'll want to make sure is you have that Cypress iframe plugin installed. And once you have that Cypress plugin installed, you are going to want to head over to your Cypress config file. I thought I already had it open. And you're going to want to make sure you have Chrome Web Security marked as false. So iframe, this is going to make syntactically it easier in your test code to work with iframes. And then the Chrome Web Security is just going to further reduce friction of dealing with iframes, especially cross-origin iframes here in the browser. I'm going to jump back over to our spec file because I want to show you an example of code we would use to go through and interact with a same origin iframe. So let me grab that example and I'm going to drop it in here at the bottom. So this is really very simple, straightforward code, and that is all thanks to that plugin that I'm leveraging. So as you can see here, we are going out, we are getting the iframe by its title attribute, and we're using frame loaded to make sure that the content is loaded before we start trying to interact with it. So then we will go, again, get that iframe, and we're going to start our interaction. Inside of that iframe, I want to find a button with the title save, and then I want to take an action. I want to click on that button. This looks very deceptively simple, and it is when it is not a cross-origin iframe. Now it does get a little more complicated when we get into crossing origins. So I have another example that I want to show you all that demonstrates that cross-origin capability. So let's pop this down here and save. So we are looking at lines 36 through 55 here. So we are going to go out and we are going to, again, get the iframe using its title. We're going to say that it should be visible, and we are going to invoke its source attribute. Remember, due to the async nature of Cypress, we need to perform that invoke action, wait for it to be done, and then move on. That's why we're leveraging this then block. So we're going to take that source attribute that I have as VF-SRC, and we are going to build out a URL. So we want to make sure that this is an absolute URL and not relative. And what this does is, if this line of code here, 42, if the source is already an absolute URL, it uses it as is. If not, it resolves it against this second parameter, which is the base URL I have defined over in my Cypress config file. Moving on, now that we have this, we know we're dealing with a cross-origin iframe. So to cross origins in Cypress, you need to leverage sci.origin. So what we're doing is we're taking and we're saying we are going to this new origin, fully qualified absolute URL. I'm also passing that same source attribute as an argument and deconstructing that argument in the callback so that my first line inside of here, I can actually do the visit to this new origin that I'm going to. Then all of this is similar to what we've seen before, going in, grabbing something from the UI, taking action on it. And in this particular instance where I'm crossing origins like this, it is really good to think about how you structure your test. How can I structure my test to minimize the need to cross over these origins? So maybe that means reordering your test cases in some way to where you're minimizing that crossing of origins. Maybe it means taking bigger tests, splitting them into smaller executable it blocks. All of those things are really important to consider when you start leveraging origin, whether it be because you're going from one domain to another because of an auth flow or because you're testing inside of these iframes. I have a couple of gotchas that I want to mention. First, if your iframe has a sandbox attribute that blocks scripts, you will actually have to go into the development environment or to your dev team, and you'll have to relax that security measure or expose a test route that you can use to be able to use this. And if you are doing this and you are experiencing flakiness when in the frame origin, it's a good idea to get in here and to do something to assert readiness instead of just using fixed weights or, dealing with a flaky test, because sometimes it's ready, sometimes it's not. So keep those gotchas in mind. The last thing that we are going to do as part of our demo here is we are going to look at a full end-to-end test in Salesforce. So I already actually have a contact spec file built out here. And as you can see, the purpose of this test is just to go into our Salesforce instance, add a new contact, fill out the form, save it, verify we're on the right page. Now, I did go ahead and pre-build this out. We're running short on time. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm going to drop this in instead of coding it out by hand. And we can, of course, still talk through it. So let's go ahead and grab this, and I'll just paste over everything on the page. All right, let's look at this from top to bottom. So we are going to leverage our sci.login. Side note, I didn't do this for this test project, but definitely should leverage a before each to be able to keep from having to put this code at the beginning of every one of your tests. So we perform those login steps. Then we are going to navigate to that contacts tab, again, using intent visual based navigation when we're thinking about what selectors to use. Then I have one of those checks built in to make sure I am at the place that I think I'm at before I move on. So doing that by checking the path name against a regex. And then we're going to go down here and we are going to look at a lightning button or a button. I want to be able to use either one, whether it's a native button, whether it's a lightning button. I want to be able to target either one. And this is what that command is doing. This comma is a CSS kind of like OR operator. So go find me a button or lightning button that has new in it. Once you have that, if it's a lightning button, then we want to wrap it and do that like Cypress wrapper around it. Go into the shadow DOM. We want to find the button and we want to click it. If it's not, then we have a much easier way of going in and just clicking directly on that native button. At this point, we would have a pop-up to fill out to create it, it being a contact. And we're just going to type in my first name and bash demo. And then what we want to do is associate this with an account. So what you're going to see when I run this test is that this is an input, but it is one of those list boxes. When you type in, it starts populating lists that you can click on and select from. Those can be a little flaky. So here's a good way to attack those. So go find the label. Again, we're looking for those visual cues. We're getting its for attribute. The label and the input, they should be wired together in the framework. So whatever I have as the value for should be the ID attribute on my actual input. So I'm going to use that ID attribute to get the element, type in bash demo as the account name. Then I am going to look for that list box UL that pops out. I'm looking for an element that contains bash demo. That's the name of the account I want to associate. And I'm going to click, and you might have to force true just because of the way of z-index and things being overlaid over these list boxes. So force true may be needed, may not. Once you have that information, we're going and we're clicking a button again. A native button or a lightning button. This is going to handle both. This is really just clicking that save to enter our contact. Once we have save, we want to make sure that we are where we think we are, using path name and a regex to do that. And then finally, I want to make sure that my contact, the appropriate contact, has been saved. So I'm just grabbing that header across the top and I'm saying, give me that header. It should have the name first and last that I typed into the form. So this is our end-to-end test. I am going to save this very quickly and I am going to pull up our Cypress runner. Cypress runner is mad at me. I've done a bunch of stuff. I can't be mad at it. So let's get out of it. I'm going to run it again. Made config changes and all, deleting, adding. I get it. So we're going to go ahead and pop open our end-to-end test. Going into contact. Here we go. We are logging in. Just trying to keep up. We got the contact form. We're typing in names. We're doing bash demo. You didn't get to see the list box. It went kind of fast, but that list box popped out. We selected the bug bash element or bash demo element from it. And then in the end verified that we have Jenna bash demo here as a contact. All right, folks, I am going to go ahead and get us back over to my face on screen. So let me stop that share. All right, so that is the demo that I have for you all today. And this demo showed you a really good way of getting started with UI testing in Salesforce. I will say that, again, we have some later additions where we are going to dive more into very specific use cases. So look out for those sessions in the future. But now that we've made it through the demo, I'd love to hear any questions that you all have about UI testing in Salesforce. So go ahead and start dropping those questions in chat for me. And while you're doing that, I just want to do a couple little plugs for like overall what we did in that end-to-end test. I want you to remember that we avoided fixed weights and we used route assertions, visual UI pieces as readiness checkpoints. We accounted for buttons that are either a native button or a lightning button in our side contains. And then with just a branching logic, we handled that shadow DOM Cypress wrap. And one little gotcha that I would mention is that if your org localizes labels on forms, you might find that test IDs on your custom Lightning components, or using the testing library plugin, so commands like find by role, they are going to be more reliable than the labels because of that localization on the labels.